Some men talk about doing the right thing, others bleed for it. In the small town of Redemption Creek, a giant cowboy named Jacob Stone took 8 knife wounds defending a poor woman he didn't even know. The town doctor said he wouldn't make it through the night, but 3 days later Jacob opened his eyes. Standing at his bedside was Marcus Whitfield, the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties, holding a letter and an offer Jacob never expected. What would a rich man want from a beaten cowboy barely clinging to life? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 1 week before Jacob Stone took those 8 knife wounds, Redemption Creek was just another struggling frontier town trying to hold itself together. The kind of place where hope came in small measures and hardship was as common as dust on the wind. It sat in a valley between 2 ranges of hills, protected from the worst of the weather, but isolated enough that trouble could fester without much interference from territorial law. The town had seen better days. 20 years earlier, when silver was discovered in the nearby mountains, Redemption Creek had swelled with prospectors and merchants, saloons and supply stores. But the silver played out quicker than anyone expected, and most folks moved on to the next promise of easy fortune. What remained was a collection of weathered buildings, a few dozen stubborn families, and the quiet determination of people who had nowhere else to go. Jacob Stone had been one of those people for the past 3 years. He'd arrived on foot with nothing but the clothes on his back, a bedroll, and his father's worn leather belt with its hand-tooled crosses. The belt was the only thing of value he owned, and he wouldn't have parted with it for any price. His father, a circuit preacher who'd spent his life traveling from town to town, bringing comfort to frontier communities, had made it himself. During the winter, Jacob turned 10. Each cross represented a lesson about living right, protecting the weak, speaking truth, standing firm when others cowered, showing mercy when others showed cruelty. Jacob's father had died when the boy was 12. Thrown from a horse while crossing a swollen river to reach a family in need. Jacob had watched from the bank, too small and too far away to help. The river had taken his father, but left the belt on the shore, as if the water itself knew some things were too sacred to claim. From that day forward, Jacob wore it always, a constant reminder of the man who'd taught him that character wasn't about what you said, but what you did when it cost you something. At 6 feet 7 inches tall and broad as a barn door, Jacob cut an imposing figure. But anyone who spent more than a minute with him recognized the gentle soul beneath the intimidating exterior. He worked odd jobs around Redemption Creek, fixing fences, hauling supplies, mucking stables, anything that needed doing. He lived in a tiny cabin at the edge of town, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it was his and he kept it clean. The work was honest, the pay was modest, and Jacob never asked for more than he'd earned. People in town respected him for his quiet strength and his unwillingness to engage in the petty conflicts that occupied so many others. When arguments broke out at the saloon, Jacob would simply finish his drink and leave. When men spoke poorly of others, he'd change the subject or walk away. He wasn't interested in gossip or grudges. He just wanted to do his work, keep to himself, and honor his father's memory by living the lessons that belt represented. But Jacob noticed things. He saw the injustices that others ignored or accepted as the way of the world. He saw when folks were struggling, when they were afraid, when they needed help but were too proud to ask. And though he kept to himself, his conscience wouldn't let him turn away when someone truly needed him. That's how he'd first noticed Sarah Coleman. She'd arrived in Redemption Creek about 2 years ago, a young widow trying to make a life from the ashes of tragedy. Her husband, Tom Coleman, had died in a mining accident just outside of town, crushed in a cave-in while working a claim everyone said was worthless. They'd been married only 3 years, and Sarah had been left with nothing but debts and memories. No family, no resources, no prospects, but Sarah had something more valuable than gold: dignity. She refused charity, refused pity, refused to let her circumstances define her. She'd found work as a seamstress, taking in mending and alterations, making curtains and tablecloths for the few families who could afford such things. Her prices were fair, her work was meticulous, and she never complained about her situation. She lived in a tiny room above the general store, barely large enough for a bed and a sewing table, but she kept it as neat as a pin. Jacob had first seen her on a Sunday morning, walking to the small church at the edge of town. She'd worn a simple dress, faded from too many washings, but clean and carefully pressed. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she carried herself with a quiet grace that spoke of inner strength. What caught Jacob's attention wasn't her appearance, though she was pretty in an understated way. It was the way she'd stopped on her way to church to give her breakfast biscuit to a street child, a boy no more than 7, whose parents had died of fever the previous winter. She'd knelt down to the boy's level, pressed the biscuit into his hands, and said something that made him smile. Then she'd continued to church as if she hadn't just given away what was likely her only meal that morning. Jacob had watched from across the street, and something in his chest had tightened. Here was someone who understood what his father had tried to teach him, that real goodness showed itself in small acts of sacrifice, in the moments when no one was watching and there was no reward to be gained. After that, Jacob found himself noticing Sarah more often, not in a romantic way, at least not at first, but with the recognition of a kindred spirit. He'd see her walking to the general store early in the morning to pick up fabric, or leaving the church on Sunday with her worn Bible tucked under her arm. He'd watch her interact with the other townspeople with patience and grace, even when they treated her with the casual dismissiveness that frontier society often showed to women without husbands or means. And he'd notice something else. The attention she was receiving from Clayton Moss and his gang of drifters. Moss had arrived in Redemption Creek about 6 months ago with 5 other men, all of them carrying the hard-eyed look of those who'd seen too much violence and developed a taste for it. They took day labor when they felt like it, spent their money at the saloon, and made themselves a nuisance to anyone they perceived as weak. The town sheriff, an aging man named Porter who was more politician than lawman, seemed content to let them be as long as they didn't cause too much trouble. But trouble was exactly what men like Moss carried with them. And it was only a matter of time before it spilled over onto someone who couldn't defend themselves. 3 days before the stabbing, Jacob had been leaving the livery stable after a day's work when he'd heard raised voices near the general store. He'd turned the corner to find Moss and 2 of his men surrounding Sarah on the wooden sidewalk. She'd been carrying a bundle of fabric, and Moss had been standing too close, saying something Jacob couldn't quite hear. But he could see Sarah's face, pale and tight with controlled fear, and he could see the way Moss's men were positioned to block her escape. Jacob had walked up without hurrying, his size and presence enough to shift the dynamic immediately. "Evening, Mrs. Coleman," he'd said, his voice calm and even. "I was heading your way if you'd like company walking home." Moss had turned, sized Jacob up, and apparently decided it wasn't worth the confrontation. Not yet anyway. He'd stepped back with a mocking smile and said, "Just being friendly with the lady, Stone. No need to play hero." "Wasn't playing anything," Jacob had replied. "Just offering to walk a neighbor home." The tension had hung in the air for a long moment before Moss had laughed, slapped one of his men on the shoulder, and walked away. Sarah had looked up at Jacob with gratitude and something else, surprise perhaps, that someone would stand up for her when she'd grown accustomed to being invisible or ignored. "Thank you," she'd said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, ma'am, I did," Jacob had replied. And he'd meant it. He'd walked her to her door that evening, and they'd spoken briefly about small things, the weather, the upcoming church social, the new fabric she was working with. But beneath the polite conversation, Jacob had sensed a shared understanding. They were both people trying to live with honor in a world that didn't always reward it. They were both alone, but not quite lonely, both shaped by loss but not defined by it. As he'd walked back to his cabin that night, Jacob had felt the weight of his father's belt against his waist and had known, with the certainty that comes from deep conviction, that trouble was coming. Men like Moss didn't forget perceived slights. They nursed them, let them fester, waited for the right moment to reassert their dominance. Jacob had just hoped he'd be there when that moment came. He'd hoped he'd be strong enough, fast enough, brave enough to do what his father had always said a good man must do, stand between cruelty and innocence, no matter the cost. He'd had no idea just how high that cost would be, or how 8 knife wounds would change not just his life, but the lives of everyone in Redemption Creek. 3 days after Jacob walked Sarah home, the trouble he'd been expecting finally arrived. It was a Thursday evening, and Jacob had just finished his work at the livery stable. The sun was setting behind the western hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if Jacob's mind hadn't been occupied with thoughts of the tension building in town. Moss and his men had been drinking heavily at the saloon for the past 2 days. Their voices growing louder and their behavior more aggressive with each passing hour. Jacob had been washing his hands at the water trough behind the stable when he heard it. A woman's scream, sharp and terrified, coming from the alley that ran between the saloon and the abandoned assayer's office. His body responded before his mind finished processing the sound. He was moving, running toward the source, his boots pounding against the hard-packed dirt. The alley was narrow and shadowed, lit only by the spill of lamplight from the saloon's back windows. Jacob turned the corner and saw them. Clayton Moss and 3 of his men had Sarah backed against the wooden wall of the assayer's office. Her sewing basket was on the ground, its contents scattered in the dirt. One of her hands was pressed against the wall behind her, the other clutching something at her throat. "Just give it here, sweetheart," Moss was saying, his voice thick with whiskey and meanness. "That locket's worth more than anything you'll ever own. Consider it payment for wasting my time the other day." "It was my mother's," Sarah said, her voice shaking but firm. "It's all I have left of her. Please, I'll give you money. Don't want money," Moss interrupted. He reached for the silver locket at her throat and Sarah twisted away. One of his men grabbed her arm, yanking her back roughly. "Want what I say I want?" Jacob's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Let her go." 4 heads turned toward him. Moss's face shifted from surprise to recognition to something ugly and satisfied. "Well, look who it is, the hero. Come to save the poor widow again?" Jacob walked forward slowly, his hands loose at his sides, his eyes never leaving Moss. "I'm asking you politely to leave Mrs. Coleman alone and go on your way. And if we don't..." This from one of Moss's men, a wiry fellow with a scar across his cheek. "Then I'll make you," Jacob said simply. Moss laughed, a sound without humor. "You think being big makes you tough. There's 4 of us, and 1 of you, Stone. You really want to die for some woman you don't even know." Jacob stopped about 10 feet away, close enough now that they could see his face clearly in the dim light. "I know she's a decent person who deserves to be left in peace. That's enough." "Ain't enough for me," Moss said. He pulled a knife from his belt, a wicked-looking blade that caught the light from the saloon windows. "See, you embarrassed me the other day. Made me look weak in front of my men. Can't let that stand." The other 3 men spread out slightly, forming a loose semicircle. 2 of them also produced knives. Jacob's mind calculated angles and distances, possibilities and probabilities. This wasn't going to end with words. It had probably never been going to end with words. Moss needed to prove something, and men like him only knew one language. "Mrs. Coleman," Jacob said, his voice calm and steady. "When I tell you, you run straight down this alley to the main street. Don't look back. Go straight to Doc Hartley's house. You understand?" "I can't leave you," Sarah whispered. "You can and you will," Jacob said. "That's how you help me." "By getting safe." Moss made his move, lunging forward with the knife aimed at Jacob's midsection. But for a man his size, Jacob moved with surprising speed. He sidestepped, caught Moss's wrist, and used the man's own momentum to send him stumbling past. The scarred man came next, slashing wildly. Jacob blocked the knife arm with his forearm, feeling the blade slice through his shirt and graze the skin. But he got inside the man's guard and drove his fist into the fellow's solar plexus. The man went down gasping. "Run!" Jacob shouted to Sarah. She hesitated for only a heartbeat, then gathered her skirts and ran. One of Moss's men moved to intercept her, but Jacob grabbed him by the collar and physically threw him against the wall. The man's head connected with the wood with a solid thunk, and he slid down, dazed. That left Moss and one other man, and now Jacob's back was to them. He turned, just as Moss's knife came up, felt the blade sink into his left shoulder, deep and burning. Jacob grabbed Moss's wrist before he could pull the knife free, but the fourth man came in from the side, his blade finding Jacob's ribs. Pain exploded through Jacob's body, white-hot and disorienting. He heard himself grunt, felt his grip on Moss weaken. The knife in his shoulder pulled free, and Moss stabbed again, this time catching Jacob high on the chest, just below the collarbone. Jacob staggered but didn't fall. Couldn't fall. If he went down, they'd kill him, and then they'd go after Sarah. His father's voice echoed in his memory. When you stand for something, boy, you stand until you can't stand anymore. And then you keep standing anyway. Jacob positioned himself in the mouth of the alley, blocking the path Sarah had taken. His blood was flowing freely now, warm and slick, but he set his feet and raised his fists. "You want through," he said, his voice rough with pain. "You go through me." Moss's face twisted with rage. "You stupid fool. You're dying for nothing?" "Not nothing," Jacob said. "For something that matters." They came at him together, both with knives. Jacob tried to block, tried to fight, but his left arm wasn't responding properly anymore, and his vision was starting to blur at the edges. He felt the blade enter his side, then his leg, then his other arm. He counted them in his head like a strange, distant litany. 3, 4, 5, 6. He was on his knees now, but still blocking the alley. Moss kicked him in the chest, and Jacob fell backward. The world tilted sideways, and the orange sky swam above him. He heard voices, shouts, the sound of running feet. Someone was screaming, but it seemed very far away. 7. The knife in his abdomen. 8. The knife across his forearm as he raised it one last time in a futile attempt to defend himself. Then there were more voices. Closer now. Townspeople, drawn by Sarah's screams and the commotion. Moss swore, said something about getting out of here. Jacob heard boots running away, the sound fading into the distance. Hands touched him, gentle and urgent. Doc Hartley's voice, "Sweet Lord, get me bandages." "Someone bring my bag." Then Sarah's voice, choked with tears, "Please don't die, please." "You can't die." Jacob wanted to tell her it was all right, that he'd do it again, that some things were worth bleeding for. But his mouth wouldn't form the words. The orange sky was darkening to purple, then to black. He felt himself being lifted, carried, jostled in ways that sent fresh waves of agony through his body. Doc Hartley's voice again, grim and certain. "He's lost too much blood. He won't make it through the night," Sarah's sob. "This is my fault. He was protecting me." Another voice, older, weathered. "He was being a good man." "That ain't nobody's fault but his own choosing." The darkness was complete now, warm and heavy like a blanket. Jacob's last conscious thought was of his father's belt, still cinched around his waist, the crosses pressed against his skin. He hoped he'd made his father proud, hoped he'd stood long enough, strong enough, hoped Sarah had gotten away safe. Then there was nothing but the dark and the distant sound of voices calling him back from wherever he was going. He didn't know if he'd answer, didn't know if he had the strength. But somewhere in that darkness, he thought he heard his father's voice, telling him the same thing he'd always said. "When you fall, boy, you get back up. Always get back up." Jacob wasn't sure he could. But for his father's memory, for Sarah, for the man he'd tried to be all his life, he would try. In his cabin, surrounded by people who thought they were watching him die, Jacob Stone's heart kept beating. Slow, irregular, weak, but beating. 8 wounds that should have killed him, 8 reasons he should have surrendered to the darkness, but surrender had never been in his nature. And somewhere in the place between life and death, Jacob decided he wasn't ready to go. Not yet. Not when there were still people who needed someone to stand for them. Not when standing was the only thing that had ever truly mattered. The first day after the stabbing, Jacob Stone existed somewhere between the world of the living and whatever lay beyond. His body, stretched out on his narrow bed in the tiny cabin, looked more like a corpse than a man. His skin had gone the color of old parchment, and his breathing came in shallow. Ragged gasps that seemed to take monumental effort. Doc Hartley had worked through the night, stitching and bandaging, doing everything his 40 years of frontier medicine had taught him. But as dawn broke over Redemption Creek, he'd sat back in the chair beside Jacob's bed and shaken his head. "I've done all I can," he'd told the small group gathered in the cabin. "The rest is up to the Lord and whatever fight's left in him." Sarah Coleman hadn't left the cabin since they'd brought Jacob in. She sat in a straight-back chair pulled close to the bed, a damp cloth in her hands that she used to wipe Jacob's fevered brow. Her eyes were red from crying, her dress rumpled and stained with blood, but she refused every suggestion that she go home and rest. "This is my fault," she'd said more than once. "He did this for me. The least I can do is be here." Doc Hartley had tried to argue, but there was a steel in Sarah's voice that brooked no disagreement. So he'd left her there with instructions to call for him if anything changed. Though they both knew what anything changed really meant. If Jacob stopped breathing, the town women came in shifts, bringing food and fresh water, clean cloths and whispered prayers. Mrs. Henderson from the general store brought soup that Sarah couldn't eat. Maria Gonzalez, who ran the boarding house, brought fresh bandages she'd boiled and dried. Even old Mrs. Pritchard, who rarely left her house anymore, sent her grandson with a jar of honey and herbs she swore would help with the fever. But as the day wore on and Jacob showed no signs of improvement, the visitors became fewer. People began preparing themselves for the inevitable. By evening, Doc Hartley had stopped by again, checked Jacob's pulse and breathing, and updated his medical journal with notes that read more like a death watch than a treatment record. "I've seen men survive terrible wounds," he told Sarah quietly, "but not like this. Not 8 deep punctures, not with this much blood loss. I don't know how his heart's still beating." Sarah had looked at Jacob's still face, at the thick bandages wrapped around his torso and limbs, at the slight rise and fall of his chest that was the only sign of life. "Maybe he's not ready to give up," she'd said. "Maybe he has something to live for." Doc Hartley had patted her shoulder gently. "Maybe so, Mrs. Coleman, maybe so." As night fell and the cabin grew quiet, Sarah found herself talking to Jacob. It felt foolish at first, speaking to an unconscious man who probably couldn't hear her, but the silence was unbearable, and the words came easier than she'd expected. "I don't even know you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, I know who you are. Everyone in town knows Jacob Stone, the gentle giant who keeps to himself and works harder than any 3 men combined. But I don't know your story. I don't know where you came from or what brought you to Redemption Creek or what you dream about when you sleep." She dabbed at his forehead with the cloth, watching for any sign of response. There was none. "My husband Tom, he was a good man too," she continued. "Different from you, but good in his own way. He had big dreams, always thought the next claim would be the one that struck it rich. He died chasing those dreams, and I've been angry about that for so long. Angry at him for leaving me, angry at myself for not stopping him, angry at God for letting it happen." Sarah paused, gathering her thoughts. Outside, she could hear the sounds of Redemption Creek settling in for the night. Dogs barking, horses nickering in the livery, the distant sound of piano music from the saloon. "But you," she said, "you didn't die chasing a dream or trying to get rich or doing anything for yourself at all. You almost died because you saw someone in trouble and couldn't walk away. That's different. That's—" Her voice broke and she had to stop to compose herself. "That's the kind of goodness I thought didn't exist anymore." She reached out and gently touched Jacob's hand where it lay on top of the blanket. His skin was hot with fever, but she held on anyway. "So you have to fight," she said firmly. "You have to come back. Because if someone like you can die for doing the right thing, then what hope is there for any of us?" The night deepened, and Sarah dozed fitfully in her chair, jerking awake every time Jacob's breathing changed or he made a small sound. In those half-dreams between sleep and waking, she found herself reliving the attack in the alley, but this time she couldn't run. This time she stayed and watched as Moss's knife found Jacob again and again. watched as he fell, watched as the light left his eyes. She'd wake, gasping, her heart racing, and have to reach out and feel the slight warmth of Jacob's skin to reassure herself that he was still alive. The second day brought no improvement. If anything, Jacob seemed to be fading. His breathing grew more labored, his fever higher. Doc Hartley came twice, changed the bandages, and found that several of the wounds were showing signs of infection, despite his best efforts. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Coleman," he said. "I've done everything I know to do. The wounds are just too severe, and his body's been through too much. It's a miracle he's lasted this long." After the doctor left, Sarah broke down. She'd been holding herself together through sheer force of will, but the finality in Doc Hartley's voice shattered her composure. She wept into her hands, great racking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. She cried for Jacob, for the waste of a good man's life. She cried for herself, for the guilt that would haunt her forever. She cried for the world, for all its cruelty and indifference. When the tears finally subsided, she felt hollowed out and exhausted. She looked at Jacob's pale face and made a decision. If he was going to die, and it seemed inevitable now, then she would make sure he didn't die alone and in silence. She would tell him everything, all the things she'd never said to anyone, all the thoughts and feelings she'd kept locked away since Tom's death. "I've been so alone," she began, her voice hoarse from crying. "After Tom died, people were kind at first. They brought food, offered sympathy, told me they'd help if I needed anything. But kindness fades, you know. After a few weeks, I was just the poor widow everyone pitied, but nobody actually wanted to deal with. I became invisible." She refreshed the cloth on his forehead, her movements automatic now. "I told myself I didn't need anyone, that I could make it on my own. And I have, mostly. I have my sewing, I have my little room, I have enough to eat most days. But it's not the same as having someone who sees you, really sees you, as a person, and not just as a problem or a pity case." Sarah settled back in her chair, still holding Jacob's hand. "You saw me," she said softly. "The day you walked me home, you didn't treat me like I was broken or helpless. You just offered to walk with me, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And when Moss came at me tonight, last night, whatever night it was, you didn't hesitate. You just stood there and took everything they gave you because you weren't going to let them hurt me." Her grip on his hand tightened. "Nobody's ever done anything like that for me. Tom loved me, I know he did, but he loved his dreams more. He chose the mine over our safety, over our future. But you chose a stranger's safety over your own life. How am I supposed to understand that? How am I supposed to live with knowing that?" The words kept coming, a flood of confession and gratitude and grief. Sarah told him about her childhood in Ohio, about meeting Tom at a church social, about their decision to head west in search of fortune. She told him about Tom's death, about the mine collapse, about seeing his broken body pulled from the rubble. She told him about the long, lonely months that followed, about learning to sew to survive, about the constant fear that she'd end up destitute or worse. And she told him about the moment in the alley when she'd realized she wasn't alone anymore, when she'd seen this giant of a man step between her and violence without a moment's hesitation. "You reminded me," she said, "that there's still good in this world, that not everyone is out for themselves, that some people still believe in something more than just survival." As dawn broke on the third day, Sarah was still talking, her voice raw and weary. She'd long since run out of grand statements and profound observations. Now she was just talking to fill the silence, telling him about the weather, about the birds she could hear outside, about the way the morning light was starting to creep through the cabin's single window. "It's going to be a beautiful day," she said. "The kind of day Tom used to love, when the air is clear and you can see all the way to the mountains. He'd say days like this were made for starting over, for believing in second chances." She paused, looking at Jacob's still face. "I wish you could see it. I wish—" His eyes opened. It happened so suddenly that Sarah almost missed it. One moment he was unconscious. The next, his eyes were open, unfocused and confused, but definitely open. She gasped, jumped to her feet, nearly knocked over the chair in her haste. "Jacob," she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "Can you hear me?" His lips moved, but no sound came out. His throat was too dry, his voice too weak. Sarah grabbed the cup of water she'd kept by the bedside and carefully lifted his head, bringing the cup to his lips. He managed a few small sips before falling back against the pillow, exhausted by even that small effort. "Don't try to talk," Sarah said, her hands shaking as she set the cup down. "Just rest. You're safe. You're going to be all right." She was crying again, but this time they were tears of relief and joy. "I have to get Doc Hartley. Don't you dare close those eyes again. Do you hear me? Stay awake!" She ran to the door, flung it open, and shouted for help. Within minutes, half the town seemed to be crowding around the cabin. Doc Hartley pushed through the crowd, his bag in hand, his face set in professional skepticism that melted into wonder when he saw Jacob awake. "Impossible," the doctor muttered as he checked Jacob's pulse, his breathing, his pupils. "By every measure of medicine I know, you should be dead, son. What you've done here is nothing short of miraculous." Jacob's eyes found Sarah in the crowd of faces hovering around his bed. He tried to speak again, and this time a single word emerged, barely audible. "Safe." Sarah pushed forward, took his hand. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm safe. Thanks to you, I'm safe." Jacob's eyes closed again, but this time it was the peaceful sleep of healing rather than the desperate unconsciousness of a dying man. His breathing steadied, his color already looking better than it had in 3 days. Doc Hartley stood back, shaking his head in amazement. "I've been practicing medicine for 40 years, he said to the assembled crowd. "I've seen men survive things they shouldn't have, and I've seen men die from wounds that should have been minor. But I've never seen anything like this." Sarah barely heard him. She was still holding Jacob's hand, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest, thanking God and fate and whatever else had brought him back from the edge of death. And in that moment, she made another promise, this one to herself. If this man had been willing to die for her, then she would make sure his sacrifice meant something. She would make sure his life, however long or short it turned out to be, was one worth living. She didn't know, couldn't have known, that at that very moment, a wealthy rancher was saddling his horse 2 days' ride away, preparing to make a journey that would change all their lives forever. It was just past noon on the 3rd day when the knock came at Jacob's cabin door. Sarah had been dozing in her chair, exhausted from 3 days of constant vigil, when the sharp rap on wood jolted her awake. Jacob was sleeping peacefully, his breathing steady and his color slowly returning to normal. Doc Hartley had left an hour earlier, with instructions to let Jacob rest and to call if his condition changed. Sarah stood, smoothed her rumpled dress, and went to the door. When she opened it, she found herself face to face with a man she'd never seen before. Though his bearing and dress immediately marked him as someone of importance, he was perhaps 60 years old, with silver hair and a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. But unlike most men who worked the land, this man wore fine clothes, a black coat tailored to fit, a white shirt with a proper collar, and boots that showed quality craftsmanship. He held a wide-brimmed hat in his hands and regarded Sarah with kind, intelligent eyes. "Mrs. Coleman?" he asked, his voice cultured but not pretentious. "Yes," Sarah said, confused. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "No, ma'am, you don't. My name is Marcus Whitfield. I own a ranch about 2 days' ride from here." He glanced past her into the cabin. "I'm here to see Mr. Jacob Stone if he's receiving visitors." Sarah's confusion deepened. Marcus Whitfield. She'd heard the name, of course. Everyone in the territory had heard of the Whitfield Ranch, one of the largest and most successful operations in 3 counties. But what would a man like that want with Jacob? "Mr. Stone is resting," she said carefully. "He was badly injured 3 nights ago and has only just regained consciousness this morning. Perhaps you could come back in a few days when he's stronger." Marcus's expression shifted to something like relief mixed with concern. "He's alive then? Thank God. I rode hard to get here, fearing I might be too late." He met Sarah's eyes. "Mrs. Coleman, I understand Mr. Stone needs rest, but I've traveled a long way, and what I have to say to him is important. Might I at least step inside for a moment?" Something in his manner, a sincerity that seemed genuine, made Sarah step aside. "Please, come in. But he's very weak. If he shows any signs of distress, I'll have to ask you to leave." "Of course," Marcus said, stepping into the small cabin. His eyes took in the modest surroundings, the bandages and medicine bottles on the table, and finally Jacob himself, lying pale and still on the narrow bed. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Dear Lord, they told me in town he'd taken 8 knife wounds, but seeing it—" He stopped, composed himself. "How bad is it?" "Doc Hartley says he should have died," Sarah said quietly. "That by every measure of medical science, there's no reason he should still be breathing. But he's stubborn, it seems. Or maybe just too good to let go of this world yet." Marcus turned to look at her, and she saw moisture in his eyes. "Good is exactly the right word, Mrs. Coleman, and that's why I'm here." Jacob stirred at the sound of voices. His eyes opened, still slightly unfocused but more alert than they'd been that morning. He saw Sarah first. Then his gaze shifted to the well-dressed stranger standing in his cabin. "Jacob," Sarah said gently, moving to his bedside. "This is Marcus Whitfield. He says he needs to speak with you." Jacob tried to push himself up, but the effort sent a wave of pain across his face. Sarah put a hand on his shoulder. "Stay down. You're not well enough to sit up yet." Marcus pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down, placing his hat on his knee. "Mr. Stone, I apologize for intruding on your recovery. But when I heard what happened to you, I knew I had to come immediately." He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather-bound letter, its edges worn from handling. "I traveled 2 days to find you because of this." Jacob's brow furrowed, confused. His voice, when he spoke, was rough and weak. "Don't know you? Why—" He coughed, and Sarah quickly brought water to his lips. "Easy," she said. "Don't strain yourself." Marcus waited patiently until Jacob had taken a few sips and settled back. "You don't know me, Mr. Stone, but you once did something that changed my life forever, even though you never knew it." He opened the letter carefully, as if it were precious beyond measure. "This was written by my daughter, Rebecca, 6 months ago, just before she died." The grief in Marcus's voice was raw and real. Sarah felt her heart constrict with sympathy. Jacob's expression softened, though confusion still clouded his features. "Rebecca was my only child," Marcus continued. "Her mother, my wife, died when Rebecca was just 12 years old. So it was just the 2 of us for 16 years, and she was—" His voice caught. "She was everything to me. The light in my life. The reason I built the ranch into what it is today. I wanted to leave her something worthy of her goodness." He paused, collecting himself before continuing. 6 months ago, Rebecca fell ill. Fever that wouldn't break, weakness that wouldn't pass. Doc came from the city, the best money could buy, but some things can't be bought or bargained with. She died on a Tuesday morning with me holding her hand, and she made me promise something before she went. Marcus looked directly at Jacob. "She made me promise to find a man who'd saved her life 7 years ago. A stranger who intervened when 3 men attacked her in Santa Fe. A man who took a beating to protect her, then disappeared before she could even thank him properly." Sarah saw recognition flicker across Jacob's face. His lips parted slightly in surprise. "You remember," Marcus said, not a question, but a statement. "Rebecca described you in her letter. She said you were the tallest man she'd ever seen, gentle-faced but strong, and that you moved to help her without a moment's hesitation when you saw she was in danger. She said one of the attackers had a knife, that you took several blows meant for her, and that by the time help arrived, the men had fled and you were bleeding in the street." Jacob closed his eyes, and Sarah could see him remembering. When he opened them again, his voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't know who she was. Just saw someone in trouble." "I know," Marcus said gently. "That's what Rebecca wrote. She said you refused to let anyone call a doctor, that you just asked if she was all right, and when she said yes, you walked away. She tried to find you the next day to thank you properly, but you'd already left town. She never forgot you, Mr. Stone. She told me that story at least a dozen times over the years. Said you proved to her that real goodness still existed in the world." Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he held the letter. "In her final days, When she knew she wouldn't recover, she wrote this. She asked me to find you, to thank you on her behalf, and to do something to honor what you'd done for her. He looked at Jacob with an intensity that filled the small cabin. You gave me 7 more years with my daughter. 7 years I wouldn't have had if you hadn't stepped in that day. There is no amount of money that can repay that debt. But Rebecca had very specific wishes about how I should try. He pulled several folded documents from inside his coat and set them on the small table beside Jacob's bed. She asked me to offer you a partnership in the ranch. Full partnership, Mr. Stone, not just employment. Equal share in the profits, equal say in the operation, a home for as long as you want one. Sarah gasped. Jacob stared at Marcus as if he'd spoken a foreign language. That's not all, Marcus continued. Rebecca's letter also mentioned Mrs. Coleman, though not by name. She wrote that when I found you, I should look around and see who you were protecting. Because, and these are her exact words, a man who stands for strangers will surely be standing for someone who needs him. She asked that I extend the same offer of protection and support to whoever that might be. He turned to Sarah. I understand you're a widow. Mrs. Coleman's struggling to make your way. My household could use someone with your skills. Rebecca had a seamstress at the ranch, but she left last month to join family in California. The position is yours if you want it, with fair wages and a room in the main house. Sarah couldn't speak. The offer was so far beyond anything she'd imagined that she couldn't process it. She looked at Jacob and saw her own shock reflected in his face. Why, Jacob managed to say, the single word taking obvious effort. Marcus smiled sadly. Because my daughter believed in rewarding goodness, and I believe in honoring my daughter's final wishes. Because when I heard what you did here in Redemption Creek, taking 8 knife wounds to protect a woman you barely knew, I knew I'd found the right man. Rebecca would have said, you were doing the same thing again, being the same person you were 7 years ago. That's rare, Mr. Stone. That kind of consistency, that kind of character. He stood, leaving the documents on the table. I don't expect an answer today. You need to heal, and this is a lot to take in. But I'm staying at the boarding house in town for the next 2 days. When you're ready to discuss it, send word, and I'll come back. Marcus picked up his hat and turned to Sarah. Mrs. Coleman, I'm sorry this offer comes at such a difficult time. I can see you've been caring for Mr. Stone without rest. That speaks well of your character too. Whatever you decide, please know that my daughter's wishes were clear. If I found Mr. Stone, I was to help whoever he was helping. That means you. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. I'm prepared to press charges against the men who did this. I have resources, connections, and a very good lawyer. If you want justice, Mr. Stone, I can help make that happen. After Marcus left, the cabin fell into stunned silence. Sarah sank into her chair, her mind racing. Jacob stared at the ceiling, his face a mixture of disbelief and something else, something like grief. Jacob? Sarah said softly. He turned his head to look at her, and she saw tears tracking down his face. She died, he said, his voice breaking. That girl in Santa Fe. She survived that day, lived 7 more years, and I never knew. Never thought about her again. Sarah reached out and took his hand. You saved her life. You gave her father 7 more years with his daughter. That's no small thing, but she's gone now, Jacob said. What difference did it make? All the difference in the world, Sarah said firmly. To her father. To her, for those 7 years she got to live. To me, because you did the same thing again. You don't measure goodness by whether people live forever. Jacob, you measure it by whether you tried to help when it mattered. Jacob closed his eyes, exhausted by the conversation and the shock of Marcus's visit. Sarah sat quietly, still holding his hand, both of them processing what had just happened. On the table beside the bed, the letter and documents sat waiting. In them lay the potential for a completely different life, a future neither of them had imagined possible just an hour ago. But first, Jacob had to heal, and then they had to decide if they were brave enough to accept a gift that seemed too generous to be real. Outside, the sun moved slowly across the sky, and Redemption Creek continued its daily rhythms. unaware that the lives of two of its residents had just been forever altered. 3 weeks passed at the Whitfield Ranch, and Sarah began to feel something she hadn't felt in years: peace. The ranch operated like a well-oiled machine, with everyone knowing their role and performing it with pride. Maria ran the household with gentle efficiency. The ranch hands worked from dawn to dusk, with Marcus and Jacob overseeing operations, and Sarah settled into her duties as seamstress with gratitude. Her room had become a true sanctuary. She'd set up her sewing table by the window where the light was best, and spent her days mending work shirts, reinforcing saddle blankets, and creating new curtains for the bunkhouse. The work was steady, the pay was fair, and for the first time since Tom's death, Sarah could save money instead of spending every penny on survival. Jacob was healing faster than Doc Hartley had predicted, though he still moved carefully and tired easily. He spent his days learning the ranch operation from Marcus, riding the property lines, meeting with cattle buyers, and studying the account books. The ranch hands had accepted him quickly, respecting his quiet competence and his willingness to work despite his injuries. Dutch in particular had taken a liking to him, often spending evenings on Jacob's cabin porch, teaching him the finer points of ranch management. Sarah and Jacob saw each other at meals in the main house, where Marcus insisted they both eat rather than taking food in their separate quarters. Their conversations were polite and careful, both of them navigating the strange new relationship they found themselves in. They were no longer just victim and rescuer, no longer bound only by trauma and gratitude. But they hadn't yet figured out what they were becoming to each other. On a Tuesday afternoon in the 3rd week, Marcus called Jacob to his study. The room was lined with books and ledgers, the walls decorated with maps, and a portrait of a young woman Sarah recognized as Rebecca. Marcus sat behind a large oak desk, papers spread before him, a troubled expression on his face. "Close the door," Marcus said, as Jacob entered. "I need to show you something." Jacob complied and took the seat across from the desk. His shoulder still bothered him in damp weather, and his side ached when he bent wrong. But overall, he felt stronger than he had since the stabbing. Marcus pulled out a sealed envelope from a locked drawer. The envelope was marked with initials, SC. "I've been going through Rebecca's final papers," Marcus said slowly, "handling her estate, making sure her wishes are properly executed. Yesterday I found this in her personal safe, along with some other documents she'd kept separate from the main estate files." He slid the envelope across the desk to Jacob. "It's addressed to SC, which I believe stands for Sarah Coleman." Jacob frowned. "But Rebecca never met Sarah. How could she have a letter for her?" "That's what I thought too," Marcus said, "until I opened it and read what's inside." He pulled out several more documents from the drawer. "Before you read the letter, you need to see these." The first document was a property deed, dated 4 months earlier. It showed that Rebecca Whitfield had purchased a mining claim outside Redemption Creek, specifically the claim that had belonged to Tom Coleman before his death. The price listed was modest, paid in cash through a lawyer in the territorial capital. The second document was a mining survey, dated 2 months earlier. Professional letterhead, detailed geological analysis, core samples, projected yields. Jacob skimmed it, not understanding all the technical language, but understanding the conclusion clearly enough. Significant silver deposit. Commercially viable, estimated value substantial. "I don't understand," Jacob said. "Why would Rebecca buy Tom Coleman's claim? And why would she have it surveyed?" "Keep reading," Marcus said quietly. The third document was a letter of instruction to the surveyor, written in Rebecca's hand. Jacob read it slowly. "Please conduct a thorough survey of the Coleman mining claim. I have reason to believe Mr. Coleman abandoned the claim within feet of a significant find. If the survey confirms valuable deposits, I wish to transfer ownership of the claim to his widow, Mrs. Sarah Coleman, along with funds sufficient to begin proper mining operations. She deserves the chance her husband died chasing." Jacob looked up at Marcus, stunned. "She was going to give it to Sarah." "Yes," Marcus said. Rebecca heard about a widow in Redemption Creek struggling to survive, decided to investigate, and discovered that Sarah's husband had died in a worthless mine that turned out not to be worthless at all. She bought the claim and had it properly surveyed, intending to give Sarah the chance at the life Tom had dreamed of, but she died before she could, Jacob said, the pieces falling into place. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. This envelope, with the deed and the transfer papers, they were meant to be delivered to Sarah, but Rebecca's illness progressed faster than anyone expected, and she never got the chance to complete the transfer. He leaned back in his chair, looking older suddenly. When I found you, when I brought you both here, I thought I was fulfilling Rebecca's wishes by offering employment and security. I had no idea she'd planned something far more substantial for Mrs. Coleman specifically. Jacob carefully opened the sealed envelope and read the letter inside. Rebecca's handwriting was shaky, written in the final weeks of her life. Dear Mrs. Coleman, though we have never met, I feel I know you through the stories I have heard. You are a widow, alone and struggling, and I am a woman facing death. Perhaps that gives us something in common. We both know what it is to lose everything and fight to keep living anyway. I have purchased your late husband's mining claim and had it properly surveyed. I'm sorry to tell you that he died mere feet from a substantial silver deposit. The injustice of this breaks my heart. He worked so hard, believed so faithfully, and never knew how close he came to success. I cannot give him back to you. I cannot undo his death or erase your suffering. But I can give you what he died seeking, the chance at prosperity, at security, at a future free from fear and want. The claim is yours, along with funds to hire proper miners and equipment. What you do with it is your choice. But please know it comes with no obligations except this. Believe that goodness still exists in the world, and pass that belief on when you can. My father will deliver this to you, along with the legal documents making the transfer official. Trust him as you would trust me. He is a good man who keeps his promises, and he will help you navigate the complexities of mining operations if you wish to pursue this opportunity. You have survived terrible loss, Mrs. Coleman. Now I hope you will have the chance to thrive. With deepest respect and hope for your future, Rebecca Whitfield. Jacob set the letter down carefully, his hands trembling. He looked at Marcus, searching for words that wouldn't come. The survey estimates the deposit could be worth $50,000. Possibly more, Marcus said quietly. Enough to make Mrs. Coleman independently wealthy. Enough to change her entire life. She doesn't know any of this, Jacob said. She has no idea. No, Marcus agreed. I didn't tell her when you both arrived, because I wanted to verify everything first, make sure the survey was legitimate, make sure the legal transfer could be completed without complications. I've spent the past 3 weeks consulting with lawyers and mining engineers. Everything checks out. The claim is real, the silver is real, and Rebecca's purchase was completely legal. All that remains is transferring ownership to Mrs. Coleman and explaining what she now possesses. Jacob stood and walked to the window, looking out over the ranch. Somewhere out there, Sarah was working in her room, mending shirts, thinking she was a paid employee grateful for steady work. She had no idea that she was about to become a wealthy woman, that her dead husband's dream had been real all along, that Tom Coleman had died 3 feet from the fortune he'd been chasing. How do we tell her? Jacob asked. Carefully, Marcus said. This is going to be overwhelming. Learning that Tom was right about the silver, that he died so close to success, that's going to hurt. But we need to tell her soon. There are decisions to be made about the mine, and legally, she's the owner now. Jacob turned back to face Marcus. There's something else. If Sarah owns a valuable mine, if word gets out about this, Clayton Moss will hear about it. Marcus finished grimly. Yes, I've thought of that too. He was already fixated on Sarah, probably because she was vulnerable and alone. If he learns she's suddenly wealthy, he'll come after her with even more determination, either to force her to marry him or to somehow steal the claim, or simply out of spite. We need to secure the mine immediately, Jacob said. Guards, proper legal documentation filed in multiple locations. Maybe even move Sarah somewhere safer until Moss is caught or killed, Marcus said bluntly. Yes, I've already sent word to the territorial marshal offering a substantial reward for Moss's capture. I've also hired private security for the mine itself. But Sarah needs to know about all of this. She needs to be part of these decisions. Jacob nodded. Should we tell her together? I think that would be best, Marcus said. This afternoon, after the noon meal. Give her time to process it without feeling like she needs to immediately make decisions. He gathered the documents carefully. Jacob, before we do this, I need to ask you something. How do you feel about Mrs. Coleman? The question caught Jacob off guard. What do you mean? I mean, Marcus said patiently, that I've watched you two together these past weeks. I've seen how you look at her when you think no one's watching. I've seen how she looks at you. And I need to know if your feelings for her will complicate this situation. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, I care about her. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. But that doesn't change anything about the mine or her ownership of it. She deserves this opportunity, whether I have feelings for her or not. I agree, Marcus said. But when we tell her, she's going to feel overwhelmed and possibly frightened. She's going to need support from people she trusts. Are you prepared to be that support without expecting anything in return? Yes, Jacob said firmly. Whatever Sarah needs, whatever she decides to do, I'll support her. No strings, no expectations. Marcus smiled slightly. You really are the man Rebecca thought you were. All right, let's go find Mrs. Coleman. They found Sarah in the parlor, working on a set of dining room curtains. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, catching the copper highlights in her dark hair. She looked up when they entered, and her smile faded when she saw their serious expressions. Is something wrong? And she asked, setting down her needle. Not wrong exactly, Marcus said. But we need to talk to you about something important. May we sit? Sarah nodded, her hands folding nervously in her lap. Jacob and Marcus took seats across from her, and Marcus laid out the documents on the low table between them. Mrs. Coleman, Sarah, what I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear, Marcus began. But it's also going to offer you opportunities you never imagined. I need you to listen carefully and know that everything I say is absolutely true and legally verified. Sarah's face had gone pale. You're frightening me. I'm sorry, Marcus said gently. That's not my intention, he picked up the deed. 4 months ago, my daughter Rebecca purchased your late husband's mining claim, the one where he died. She did it quietly, through a lawyer, and she had it professionally surveyed. He handed her the survey report. Sarah took it with shaking hands, her eyes scanning the technical language, clearly not understanding most of it. What does this mean? Oh, she whispered. It means Tom was right, Jacob said softly. There was silver in that mine. He was 3 feet away from a significant deposit when the cave-in happened. 3 feet, Sarah. The survey confirms it. Sarah's face crumpled. She pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. 3 feet, she repeated. He died 3 feet away from everything he'd been working for. Marcus gave her a moment before continuing. Rebecca bought the claim because she heard about your situation and wanted to help. She planned to give you the mine along with funds to operate it properly. She wanted you to have what Tom had died seeking. He handed her Rebecca's letter. Sarah read it through tears, her hands trembling so badly that the paper shook. When she finished, she looked up at Marcus and Jacob with an expression of utter devastation mixed with disbelief. She did this for me? A stranger? Yes, Marcus said. That was who my daughter was. She believed in helping people, in rewarding goodness, in giving people second chances. He pulled out the transfer papers. These documents make you the legal owner of the claim, Sarah. It's yours. The mine, the silver, all of it. How much? Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. How much silver? The surveyors estimate the deposit could yield $50,000 or more, Marcus said. Possibly much more if the vein extends as far as they think it might. You're a wealthy woman, Sarah, or you will be once proper mining operations begin. Sarah stood abruptly and walked to the window, her back to them. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Jacob wanted to go to her, to comfort her, but he stayed seated, giving her space to process. "Tom died for nothing," she finally said, her voice thick with grief. "He was right there. If he'd dug just a little further, if he'd had better equipment, if he'd—" She stopped, unable to continue. "He didn't die for nothing," Jacob said firmly. "He died trying to provide for you, trying to build a future. That means something. And now you have the chance to see that future realized, to do something meaningful with what he found." Sarah turned to face them. "What am I supposed to do with a silver mine? I don't know anything about mining or business or—" She gestured helplessly. "I'm a seamstress. I sew curtains and men's shirts. How am I supposed to run a mining operation?" "You hire people who do know," Marcus said practically. "Mining engineers, supervisors, security. I can help you find trustworthy people. And the mine can also employ men from Redemption Creek, give them work, help the whole community prosper. You don't have to do this alone, Sarah, but it changes everything," Sarah said, new tears falling. "I came here as an employee, grateful for a job and a safe place to live. Now I'm, wealthy? It doesn't feel real. It feels like a dream I'm going to wake up from." "It's real," Jacob assured her. "The documents are legal. The survey is accurate. The silver is there. This is real, Sarah." She sank back into her chair, looking between them. "Why are you both looking so worried? This should be good news, shouldn't it?" Marcus and Jacob exchanged glances. Marcus spoke carefully. "It is good news, but it also complicates your safety situation. Glayton Moss was already targeting you because you were vulnerable and alone. If he learns you now own a valuable mine, he'll come after me even harder," Sarah finished, understanding dawning. "He'll want the mine, or want to force me into giving it to him, or—" She wrapped her arms around herself. "I can't win, can I? When I had nothing, I was a target because I was weak. Now that I have something, I'm a target because I have something worth stealing. That's why we need to take precautions," Marcus said. "I've already hired guards for the mine site itself, but we also need to file the ownership documents in multiple locations, make it impossible for anyone to challenge your claim or forge a transfer. And we need to be honest with you. Until Moss is caught, you're in danger." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've been in danger since Tom died. At least now I have resources to defend myself." She wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. "All right, tell me what needs to be done. Tell me how to protect this claim and start making it productive. If Rebecca gave this to me, if Tom died finding it, then I owe it to both of them to make something good come from it." Jacob felt a surge of admiration for her strength. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a frightened widow watching him nearly die. Now she was facing down danger and making plans to build an empire. She was extraordinary. They spent the next 2 hours discussing logistics. Marcus explained the legal processes for filing claims, the costs of hiring mining crews, the expected timeline for beginning operations. He offered to advance funds for equipment and labor to be repaid from the mine's first yields. Sarah listened carefully, asked intelligent questions, and began to see the shape of what this could become. "I want to name it the Rebecca Tom Mine," she said suddenly. "After both of them. They're the reason this opportunity exists." "I think my daughter would have liked that," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. As the sun began to set, they concluded their discussion with a plan. Tomorrow, Jacob and Dutch would ride to the county seat to file the documents officially. Marcus would begin interviewing mining supervisors and engineers. Sarah would write to the women she'd known in Redemption Creek, offering employment to their husbands and sons in the new mining operation. "One more thing," Jacob said, as they prepared to leave the parlor. "Sarah, I want you to know that this doesn't change anything between us. You're not obligated to me because I helped you that night. This mine, this wealth, it's yours. You don't owe me anything." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her eyes still red from crying but clear and direct. "Jacob Stone, you took 8 knife wounds for me. You almost died protecting me. You've supported me through all of this without asking for anything in return. I know I don't owe you. That's not what's between us. What's between us?" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "What's between us is respect and gratitude and something else I'm not quite ready to name. But it's real and it matters, and it has nothing to do with obligation. Jacob felt warmth spread through his chest. He wanted to say more, wanted to cross the room and take her hand, wanted to tell her that what he felt went far beyond protection or duty. But not now. Not when she was overwhelmed and vulnerable and processing news that had shaken her world. "Thank you," he said simply, "for saying that." After Jacob left, Sarah sat alone in the darkening parlor, the documents spread before her. She touched the deed with Tom's name on it, then Rebecca's letter, then the survey showing that her husband had been right all along. 3 feet. Tom had died 3 feet from vindication, from success, from everything he'd dreamed of. The injustice of it made her want to scream. But Rebecca had found it, had bought it, had planned to give it to her as an act of pure generosity from one woman to another. And now Sarah had choices she'd never imagined. Wealth, security, independence, the power to help others, to employ people from Redemption Creek, to honor both Tom's memory and Rebecca's gift by building something meaningful, but also danger. Moss was still out there, still hunting, still dangerous. And now she had something he would want desperately enough to kill for. Sarah gathered the documents and carried them to her room. She locked them in the small trunk where she kept her few valuables, then sat on her bed and allowed herself to imagine the future. A mine named for the 2 people whose deaths had led to this moment. Jobs for struggling families, security for herself, and maybe, just maybe, the chance to explore what was growing between her and a gentle giant who'd been willing to die for her. Tomorrow would bring challenges and decisions and dangers. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, Sarah Coleman went to sleep feeling like the world held possibilities instead of just threats. And that, she thought, was worth celebrating, even if only in the quiet of her own heart. The rider came hard and fast, just after midnight, his horse's hooves pounding against the packed earth of the ranch road. The sound woke Dutch, who'd been sleeping light in the bunkhouse, and within minutes the entire ranch was alert and armed. Jacob emerged from his cabin, still pulling on his shirt, his right hand already gripping his rifle. Marcus appeared on the main house porch, lamp in hand, just as the rider pulled up in a spray of dust. It was one of the ranch hands who'd been in town picking up supplies. His name was Billy, barely 20 years old, and his face was pale with fear in the lamplight. "Moss," he gasped, sliding from his exhausted horse. "Clayton Moss and his men. They're camped 10 miles out. Someone in town was talking about Mrs. Coleman owning that silver mine, and Moss heard. He's got more men now, boss. At least a dozen, maybe more. And they're planning to raid the ranch." Marcus's face hardened. "When? Don't know for sure, but soon. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow." They were drinking heavy and talking about how no woman should own that kind of wealth, how it should belong to real men. Billy looked at Jacob. "They talked about you too. Mr. Stone said they had a score to settle." Jacob felt his jaw clench. He'd known this was coming, but the reality of it still sent cold dread through his veins. Moss had been hunting them for weeks, and now he had both motivation and numbers. Dutch emerged from the bunkhouse, followed by the other ranch hands. He took one look at the scene and started issuing orders. "Everyone arm up. Cole, you and Jenkins secure the horses. Martinez, check the ammunition stores. Billy, get your horse to the stable and get some water in you. Move!" Marcus turned to Jacob. "We need to get Sarah somewhere safe tonight." "Where?" Jacob asked. "If Moss has a dozen men, they can cover the roads. We'd be riding into an ambush. Then we fortify here," Marcus said. "We've got good defensive positions, plenty of ammunition, and men who know how to use them. But I want Sarah in the main house cellar. It's stone, defensible, safest place on the property." Jacob nodded and started toward the house. But Sarah was already emerging, wrapped in a shawl over her nightdress, her face frightened but composed. "I heard," she said. "Moss is coming for me." "For the mine," Jacob corrected. "This isn't about you personally anymore, Sarah. It's about $50,000 in silver that he thinks he can steal." "Then let him have it," Sarah said desperately. "I'll sign it over, give him the deed, whatever he wants. I'm not worth people dying over." "You're worth everything," Jacob said firmly. "And besides, Men like Moss don't just take what they want and leave. They take everything and destroy anyone who stood against them. Running or surrendering won't save you. It'll just make you a victim twice over." Marcus had been listening, and now he put a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Jacob's right. We fight or we watch everything Rebecca tried to build, everything you're trying to build, get stolen by violent men. I won't let that happen. Not to you, not to this ranch, not to my daughter's legacy." Sarah looked between them, then nodded slowly. "Tell me what I need to do. Right now," Jacob said. "You go with Maria to the cellar. There's a stockpile of food and water there, plus medical supplies. You stay there, door barred, until we give the all clear. What about you?" Sarah asked, looking directly at Jacob. "You're still healing." "Those wounds are healed enough," Jacob said. He touched the spot on his chest where the deepest knife wound had been. It still ached, especially in cold weather, but he could move, could shoot, could fight if needed. "I'll be fine, Sarah, I promise." Sarah reached out and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "You promised that before, and you almost died. Don't make promises you might not be able to keep." "Then I promise this instead," Jacob said. "I promise I'll do everything I can to make sure we all see tomorrow." "That's the best I can offer." Sarah nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. She squeezed his hand once more, then let Maria lead her into the house. Jacob watched her go, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. Marcus gathered everyone in the ranch yard. 15 men total, counting Jacob and himself. Not great odds against a dozen or more attackers, but better than nothing. Dutch had already been organizing defensive positions. "All right," Marcus said, his voice carrying authority born from decades of leadership. "You all know what's coming. Clayton Moss and his gang want to take what's ours, hurt people under my protection, and probably burn this place to the ground if they get the chance. We're not going to let that happen." He pointed to various positions around the ranch. "Dutch, you take 4 men and fortify the barn. It's got good sight lines and solid cover. Jenkins, you and 3 others secure the bunkhouse. Jacob, you'll be with me and the remaining men in and around the main house. We form a triangle of defensive positions. Anyone who tries to attack has to expose themselves to multiple angles of fire." Dutch spoke up. "What about the perimeter? Should we send scouts?" "No," Marcus said. "We stay together, stay fortified. Moss wants us scattered and vulnerable. We give him targets he can't easily reach. When he attacks, and he will attack, we make him pay for every foot of ground." Jacob listened, impressed by Marcus's tactical thinking. This was a man who'd built an empire in hostile territory, who'd dealt with cattle rustlers and claimed jumpers, and worse. He knew how to defend what was his. "One more thing," Marcus said, his voice softer now. "If any of you want to leave, to ride out before this starts, I understand. This isn't your fight. You signed on to work cattle, not to face down killers. No shame in riding out now." No one moved. Dutch spat tobacco juice in the dirt and said, "Boss, we ain't riding nowhere. You took care of us for years. About time we returned the favor." The other men nodded, murmured agreement. Several checked their rifles, their faces set with determination. Jacob felt a surge of respect for these men who were choosing to stand when they could have fled. "All right then," Marcus said. "Let's get to it. And someone wake up Doc Hartley in town. Tell him to be ready for wounded. I pray we won't need him, but better to be prepared." As the men dispersed to their positions, Jacob pulled Marcus aside. "I want the barn loft. Best vantage point, and I can still shoot accurately despite the shoulder. You sure?" Marcus asked. "That's a lot of ladder climbing for someone who's still healing." "I'm sure," Jacob said. "Dutch and his men can hold the barn floor. I can provide covering fire from above. It's the best use of my abilities right now." Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But Jacob, you've already almost died once for her. Don't do it again. Planning on all of us surviving this," Jacob said. "But if it comes down to it, I'd rather die standing than live knowing I ran. Your father taught you that, I suppose." Jacob touched his belt.
"Yes, sir."
"Along with everything else that matters, they spent the next hour preparing. Ammunition was distributed, water barrels positioned for fighting fires, medical supplies laid out. The ranch took on the air of a fortress, every window now a potential firing position, every corner a place to take cover. Jacob climbed to the barn loft, testing his mobility, making sure he could move despite the lingering stiffness in his side. The loft was perfect, high enough to see the approaches from multiple angles, solid enough to provide cover, with several bales of hay positioned for additional protection. Dutch checked on him just before dawn. "You good up there, partner?" "Good as I'll ever be," Jacob replied. He'd positioned 3 rifles within easy reach, along with boxes of ammunition and a canteen of water. "How about you? Been in worse scrapes?" Dutch said, though his eyes suggested otherwise. "You know Moss is going to come at us hard. He's got numbers and motivation. This ain't going to be pretty." "No," Jacob agreed, "but we've got right on our side. That counts for something." Dutch laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Right don't stop bullets, son. But courage helps. And you got plenty of that." He started down the ladder, then paused. "That woman in the cellar, Mrs. Coleman, she worth dying for." Jacob didn't hesitate. "Yes, but more than that, standing against men like Moss is worth dying for. If we let them take what they want through violence, what kind of world are we living in?" "A bad one," Dutch agreed. "All right then. See you when this is over." As dawn broke, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, the ranch settled into tense waiting. Men checked and rechecked their weapons, drank coffee, spoke in low voices. Some prayed. Some wrote letters to families just in case. In the main house cellar, Sarah sat with Maria, listening to the muffled sounds of preparation above them. The older woman had brought blankets and food, treating this like a storm to be weathered rather than a battle to be fought. "Have you been through something like this before?" Sarah asked. "Once," Maria said. "About 15 years ago, bandits tried to take the ranch. Mr. Whitfield's wife was still alive then, and Miss Rebecca was just a girl. We hid in this same cellar while the men fought. Lost 2 good hands that day, but we held the ranch. Were you frightened?" "Terrified," Maria admitted. "But being frightened don't change what needs doing. Those men up there, they're fighting for you, for Mr. Whitfield, for this place. Least we can do is have courage to wait and trust them." Sarah pulled Rebecca's letter from her pocket. She'd been carrying it everywhere since Marcus gave it to her, reading it whenever doubt crept in. Now she read it again by lamplight, drawing strength from a dead woman's kindness. She was special, Maria said softly, seeing what Sarah was reading. "Miss Rebecca. Kind in ways that seem rare these days. Mr. Whitfield hasn't been the same since she passed. Having you and Mr. Stone here, working to honor her wishes, it's given him purpose again. I don't want anyone dying for that purpose," Sarah said. "Sometimes we don't get to choose," Maria replied. "We just get to choose how we face what comes." Above them, the sun climbed higher. The ranch hands ate breakfast at their positions, staying alert. Jacob watched the horizon from the barn loft, his eyes scanning for any sign of movement. His wounds ached. They always did when tension ran high, but he ignored the pain. He'd endured worse. Around 10 in the morning, one of the perimeter guards whistled sharply. Movement on the eastern ridge, about a mile out. Riders, more than a dozen, spreading out as they approached. "They're here," Dutch called out. "Everyone ready?" Jacob chambered around in his rifle and settled into position. Through the barn loft opening, he could see them now, a ragged line of mounted men, moving with the confidence of superior numbers. He picked out Clayton Moss at the center, recognizable even at this distance by his build and bearing. The riders stopped about 300 yards out, just beyond effective rifle range. Moss separated from the group and rode forward alone, stopping when he was about 200 yards from the main house. Close enough to be heard, far enough to stay relatively safe. "Marcus Whitfield," Moss shouted. "I'm here to make you an offer." Marcus stepped out onto the main house porch, rifle in hand but not raised. "I'm listening, though I doubt I'll like what I hear." "Simple deal," Moss called back. "Send out Sarah Coleman with the deed to that mine, and we ride away. No one has to die today. And if I refuse—" Moss's laugh carried across the distance, ugly and mean. "Then we take her anyway, and burn your ranch to the ground in the process. Your choice, old man. Mine, or everything." Jacob watched from the barn loft, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. He could take the shot from here. Moss was just barely in range. But starting a firefight while Moss was under a flag of parley, even an informal one, went against everything his father had taught him about honor. Marcus seemed to be thinking the same thing. The mine belongs to Mrs. Coleman, it's not mine to give. And even if it were, I wouldn't hand over an innocent woman to a murderer and a thief. So here's my counteroffer, Moss. Turn yourself in to the marshal. Face justice for what you've done. That's the only deal I'm offering. Moss spat in the dirt. Bad choice, Whitfield. Real bad choice. Last chance. Send her out or we come in and take her. Then you'd better come ready to die, Marcus said calmly. Because we're not giving up anything without a fight. Moss wheeled his horse around and rode back to his men. Even from a distance, Jacob could see the rage in his posture. There would be no more talking. Now came the violence. Moss and his men spread out, forming a wide arc around the ranch. They were going to attack from multiple sides simultaneously, trying to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers. It was a brutal tactic, and it would work if the ranch hands broke and ran, but no one was running. Dutch had positioned his men well, and they waited with the patience of experienced fighters. Marcus and his group were equally ready. And Jacob, in the barn loft, had clear lines of sight to almost every approach. Here they come. Someone shouted. The riders spurred their horses forward, and the battle for the Whitfield ranch began. The first shots cracked across the morning air, sharp and deadly. Jacob watched through the barn loft opening as Moss's men charged in a loose formation, firing from horseback. Wild shots meant more to intimidate than to kill, at least initially. The ranch hands held their fire, waiting for the attackers to come into effective range. Steady! Dutch's voice called from the barn floor below Jacob. Let them get close, then make every shot count. Jacob sighted down his rifle, tracking one of the riders approaching from the northeast. The man was young, probably not even 20, riding hard with a pistol in one hand. Jacob led him slightly, accounting for the movement, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, sending a jolt of pain through his still-healing wounds, but the shot flew true. The rider jerked in his saddle and tumbled to the ground. His horse veered away, riderless. Below him, Dutch and his men opened fire, their rifles speaking in a coordinated volley. 2 more attackers went down. The initial charge faltered as the survivors realized they were facing disciplined fire from prepared positions. From the main house, Marcus's group added their fire to the defense. The attackers scattered, seeking whatever cover they could find. Boulders, low ridges, the few trees scattered across the approach. Some of them dismounted, recognizing that charging directly into defensive fire was suicide. Jacob reloaded and scanned for targets. His shoulder ached from the recoil, and he could feel fresh warmth where one of his knife wounds had split slightly. He ignored it. Pain was just information. And right now, the information it was giving him, that he was alive and fighting, was all that mattered. Moss had taken cover behind a large boulder about 150 yards out. Jacob could see him directing his men, sending some to flank the barn, while others concentrated fire on the main house. It was decent tactics for a gang of thugs. Split the defenders' attention, probe for weaknesses, overwhelm them piece by piece. But Moss had underestimated the determination of the ranch hands. These weren't cowards or hired guns looking for easy money. They were men fighting for their home, for people they cared about, for something that mattered. That made all the difference. A group of 3 attackers made a rush toward the barn, using an irrigation ditch for cover. Jacob tracked them, waiting for the right moment. When they broke cover to cross the final 20 yards, he fired 3 times in quick succession, working the rifle's lever action smoothly despite the pain. All 3 went down. Good shooting. Dutch called up. Keep them off us! The battle developed into a brutal exchange of fire. The attackers had numbers, but the defenders had position and motivation. Minutes stretched into an hour, then longer. The sun climbed higher, and the morning heat began to build. Smoke from rifle fire hung in the air, acrid and bitter. Jacob's ammunition was running low when he heard a new sound, hoofbeats approaching from the west, from the direction of town. His heart sank. Had Moss brought reinforcements? But then he heard shouting, different voices. and saw riders cresting the western ridge, flying improvised white flags. It was the townspeople of Redemption Creek. Doc Hartley led them, riding better than a man his age should have been able to. Behind him came shopkeepers, farmers, even the useless Sheriff Porter, all armed and riding hard toward the ranch. Reinforcements, Jacob shouted down to Dutch. From town! The townspeople swept into the battle with fresh energy. They weren't experienced fighters, but they were angry men who'd heard that Clayton Moss was attacking the ranch where Jacob Stone lived, where Mrs. Coleman had found safety. Doc Hartley had rallied them with a simple speech. Jacob Stone took 8 wounds for one of our own. Time we returned the favor. Now there were 30 defenders instead of 15, and the tide turned decisively. Moss's men, already depleted and demoralized, began to retreat. Some tried to reach their horses, others just ran on foot. Jacob watched them scatter like leaves before a storm, but Moss himself wasn't running. Through the barn loft opening, Jacob could see him still behind that boulder, refusing to yield. And he was doing something with his rifle, checking the chamber, wiping the sights with his sleeve. He was preparing for one last, desperate act. Jacob's blood ran cold when he realized what Moss was planning. The man wasn't aiming at the barn or the main house positions anymore. He was sighting on the main house itself, specifically on the door to the cellar. He'd figured out where Sarah was hiding. No, Jacob breathed. He raised his rifle, but his hands were shaking from exhaustion and pain. The shot was long, at least 150 yards, and he only had one chance. If he missed, Moss might get a shot through one of the cellar's narrow windows, might hit Sarah or Maria. Jacob forced himself to breathe slowly, to ignore the pain screaming through his shoulder and side. The territorial marshal arrived the next day, a stern man named Garrett, who'd been tracking Moss's gang for months. He took statements from everyone involved, documented the evidence, and within hours had the prisoners loaded into a reinforced wagon bound for the territorial prison. Moss, still in considerable pain from his leg wound, glared at Jacob as he was loaded in. "You should have let me die," Moss spat. "Would have been kinder than what's waiting for me." "You'll face justice," Jacob said calmly. "That's more than you gave the people you hurt." Marshal Garrett tipped his hat to Jacob before departing. "World needs more men like you, Mr. Stone, fewer like him." As the prison wagon disappeared down the ranch road, Sarah stood beside Jacob on the main house porch, watching it go. She'd slept fitfully the night before, kept waking to check that Jacob was still in the guest room, still breathing, still safe. Now, in the clear light of day, the reality was finally sinking in. The threat was over. Moss would hang or spend the rest of his life in prison. His gang was scattered or captured. She was truly, finally safe. "What are you thinking?" Jacob asked softly. "That I can breathe for the first time in weeks," Sarah admitted. "Maybe for the first time since Tom died. I've been living in fear for so long, I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to not be afraid." "You hid it well," Jacob said. "You've been braver through all this than anyone I've ever known." Sarah shook her head. "I wasn't brave. I was terrified. But I had people standing with me, standing for me. That made the difference." She looked up at him. "You made the difference." Before Jacob could respond, Marcus emerged from the house carrying a small wooden box. "I have something for you both," he said. "Come, sit with me." They settled into the porch chairs, and Marcus opened the box. Inside were 2 simple gold wedding bands, old but beautifully crafted, glowing warm in the sunlight. "These belonged to Rebecca's grandparents," Marcus explained, his voice thick with emotion. "They were married for 63 years, lived through hardships I can barely imagine, and loved each other every single day. When Rebecca's grandmother died, she left these rings to Rebecca. Told her to save them for when she found real love, the kind that lasts." He looked between Jacob and Sarah. "Rebecca never married, never found that person. But before she died, she told me these rings should go to someone who understood what real love means. Someone who would honor them." Sarah's breath caught. Jacob sat very still, understanding what Marcus was offering, but not quite believing it. "I'm not saying you have to use them," Marcus continued. "I'm not even saying you should get married right away. But I want you to have them for when you're ready. Because I've watched you two these past weeks, and I see something Rebecca would have recognized. Two people who make each other better, who stand together when it matters, who've built something real out of shared hardship. He held out the box. Sarah reached for it with shaking hands, opening it fully to see the rings nestled in velvet. They were beautiful in their simplicity, plain gold bands with an inscription inside each that read, "All my days." "Marcus, this is too much," Sarah whispered. "It's exactly right," Marcus said firmly. Rebecca wanted these rings to go to people who would appreciate what they represent. "You do, both of you," he stood. "I'll leave you two to talk. But know this, whatever you decide, you have my blessing and my support. You're family now, both of you. That won't change." After Marcus went inside, Jacob and Sarah sat in silence, both of them staring at the rings. Finally, Sarah spoke. "He's right, you know. About what's between us, I know," Jacob said quietly. "But we barely know each other. We've been through terrible things together. But is that enough foundation for," she gestured at the rings, "for something permanent?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. "My father used to say that you learn more about a person's character in one hard moment than in 1,000 easy ones. We've had nothing but hard moments since we met, Sarah, and in every one of them, I've seen who you really are. Strong, brave, kind, determined. Everything that matters. I've seen the same in you," Sarah said softly. "But Jacob, I'm terrified. I married once for love and I lost him. The thought of caring that much again, of risking that kind of pain—" "I know," Jacob said, reaching over to take her hand. "I'm scared too. I've spent my whole life alone, never letting anyone get too close because it seemed safer that way. But meeting you changed something. Made me want to risk it. Made me think that maybe some things are worth being afraid for." Sarah looked at their joined hands, then at the rings, then at Jacob's face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you," Jacob said simply. "I've probably loved you since I woke up and saw you sitting by my bed, looking at me like I mattered. Maybe even before that, in that alley when I realized I'd rather die than let anyone hurt you. I love you, Sarah Coleman, and I want to build a life with you. Not because you owe me, not because of obligation or gratitude, but because I choose you. Because you're the best person I've ever known, and I want to spend whatever time I have left trying to be worthy of that." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "I love you too. I think I have since you walked me home that first time, since you stood between me and danger without hesitation. But loving you terrifies me, Jacob. What if something happens? What if I lose you like I lost Tom?" "You might," Jacob admitted. "Life doesn't come with guarantees. But Sarah, we could spend our whole lives being afraid of loss and miss out on everything beautiful. Or we could be brave enough to love each other despite the fear. I know which choice I want to make." Sarah wiped her eyes, laughed shakily. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple," Jacob said. "Not easy, but simple. Do we love each other? Yes. Do we want to be together? Yes. Do we trust each other enough to face whatever comes next? Yes. Everything else is just details." Sarah picked up the smaller of the two rings, held it to the light. "All my days," she read softly. Then she looked at Jacob. "Is that your promise?" "All your days?" "Every single one," Jacob said. "For as long as I'm breathing, I'll stand by you, support you, love you. That's my promise?" "Then yes," Sarah said, fresh tears falling. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'll love you all my days too, Jacob Stone. I'll be brave enough to choose happiness, to choose you, despite the fear." Jacob took the ring from her fingers and gently slid it onto her left hand. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then Sarah took the larger ring and placed it on Jacob's hand, her fingers trembling. "Partners," she whispered. "In everything," Jacob confirmed. They sat there for a long moment, just holding hands, watching the sunlight play across their new rings. From inside the house, they heard Maria's delighted gasp. She'd clearly been watching from the window, and then Marcus's deeper laugh. "I think they're happy for us," Sarah said, smiling through her tears. "I think everyone will be," Jacob replied. "But I don't care what anyone else thinks. I only care what you think I think, Sarah said carefully, that I want to marry you soon. Not a big ceremony, not months of planning. Just us, Marcus, whoever we care about and promises we mean to keep. When? Sarah considered. 2 months? That gives us time to plan something small, time for you to heal completely, time to get the mine operations started. Is that too soon? It's perfect, Jacob said. Over the next weeks, life at the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Jacob's wound healed properly this time, the stitches holding firm. He and Marcus worked together on ranch operations, while Dutch handled day-to-day management. The partnership was proving successful, with Jacob's practical wisdom complementing Marcus's business experience. Sarah, meanwhile, threw herself into planning both the wedding and the mine operations. With Marcus's help, she hired a reputable mining engineer and a crew of experienced miners, many of them men from Redemption Creek who needed work. The Rebecca Tom mine began operations with proper equipment and safety measures, nothing like the desperate, dangerous conditions that had killed Tom. The first shipment of silver ore exceeded even the surveyor's optimistic projections. Sarah divided the profits carefully, paying workers fair wages, investing in better equipment, setting aside funds for the community, and saving the rest. She consulted Jacob on every major decision, true to her promise of equal partnership. One evening, about 6 weeks after the proposal, Jacob found Sarah in Marcus's study, poring over mine reports and financial ledgers. She'd taken to the business side of mining with surprising aptitude, her careful nature and attention to detail serving her well. "You're going to be richer than Marcus at this rate," Jacob teased gently. Sarah looked up and smiled. "We're going to be richer than Marcus. It's our mine, remember? Partners. I still don't feel right taking half the profits when you're the one doing all this work," Jacob admitted. "You're working the ranch, I'm working the mine," Sarah said practically. "We're both contributing to our future. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Sharing the work, sharing the rewards, facing everything together." Jacob crossed the room and pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her carefully. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from watching a man who takes 8 knife wounds for strangers," Sarah said, resting her head against his chest. "He taught me about courage and partnership and standing for what matters." "He sounds like a good man." "The best," Sarah confirmed. "A little stubborn, terrible at accepting help, but the best." They stood there in comfortable silence until Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you both. Says it's about the wedding." They followed Marcus to the front parlor where Doc Hartley waited, looking pleased with himself. "Heard you two need someone to officiate a wedding. Turns out I'm legally authorized to perform marriages in the territory. Been doing it for years, when the circuit preacher can't make it to outlying areas. If you want me, I'd be honored." Sarah's face lit up. "Doc, that would be perfect. You've been there through everything. You saved Jacob's life twice. You've supported us both. We'd love to have you officiate." "Good," Doc said. "Then let's talk about the ceremony. I'm assuming you want something simple?" They spent the next hour planning. The wedding would be held at the ranch in 6 weeks on a Saturday afternoon. Maria would handle the food, with help from some of the town women. The ceremony would be in the ranch yard under the cottonwood trees, with seating for about 30 people. Sarah would wear a dress she'd sewn herself from fabric Marcus had ordered special from San Francisco. Jacob would wear his best clothes and his father's leather belt with the tooled crosses. "Who's going to give you away?" Doc asked Sarah. Sarah looked at Marcus. "Would you? I know it's not traditional, and I'm not your daughter, but you've been like family to me, you and Rebecca both, even though I never met her. I'd be honored if you'd walk me down the aisle." Marcus's eyes welled with tears. "Sarah, the honor would be mine. Rebecca would have loved you, you know. She would have been so happy to see this. She made it possible," Sarah said softly. "In so many ways, she made all of this possible." As the weeks passed and the wedding approached, the ranch buzzed with quiet excitement. The ranch hands built benches for seating and constructed an arch of willow branches for the ceremony. Maria and the town women prepared enough food to feed half the territory. Dutch organized the younger hands to clean and decorate everything within sight the night before the wedding. Sarah couldn't sleep. She wandered down to the kitchen where she found Maria preparing tomorrow's bread. "Can't sleep either?" Maria asked with a knowing smile. "Too excited." "Too nervous?" "Too everything," Sarah admitted. She sat at the kitchen table watching Maria work. "Maria, can I ask you something? How do you know you're making the right choice?" "You don't," Maria said honestly. "Marriage is always a leap of faith. But you look at the person and ask yourself, do I trust them? Do I respect them? Do they make me want to be better?" If the answer is yes to all three, then you jump and trust that you'll figure out the landing together. "I trust him completely," Sarah said. "Respect him more than anyone I've ever known. And he definitely makes me want to be better." "Then you have your answer," Maria said. "The rest is just details." In his cabin, Jacob was also awake, sitting on his porch and looking at the stars. He heard footsteps and turned to find Marcus approaching with 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. "Thought you might need some company," Marcus said, settling into the other chair. "Aren't grooms supposed to get drunk the night before their wedding?" Jacob asked. "Only if they're unsure," Marcus said. "Are you unsure?" "Not even a little bit," Jacob said. "Sarah's the best thing that ever happened to me. Marrying her is the easiest decision I've ever made." "Then we'll just have one drink," Marcus said, pouring for both of them, "to toast what's coming." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Marcus spoke. "Rebecca would have liked seeing this, you know. She always believed in love stories that started with sacrifice and courage. Yours and Sarah's would have delighted her." "I wish I could thank her," Jacob said. "For everything she set in motion." "You thank her by living well," Marcus said. "By being happy, by building something good with Sarah, by proving that her faith in goodness was justified." He raised his glass. "To Rebecca, who brought us all together, and to tomorrow, when 2 good people promise to face life together." "To Rebecca," Jacob echoed. "And to tomorrow." They drank and the stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the main house, Sarah finally fell asleep, dreaming of wildflowers and promises and all the days yet to come. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect, with the kind of sky that seemed made for new beginnings. Jacob woke early, dressed carefully, and spent time alone with his father's Bible, the one item of his father's besides the belt that he still possessed. He read familiar passages about love and commitment, about building your house on solid foundations, about the importance of standing firm when storms came. Then he fastened his father's belt around his waist, feeling the familiar weight of it, the crosses pressed against his side. His father would have liked Sarah, Jacob thought, would have approved of her strength, her kindness, her willingness to choose hope, despite having every reason to choose bitterness. "Wish you were here," Jacob said quietly to the empty room. "But I think you'd be proud of the man I've tried to become." At the main house, Maria and the town women were helping Sarah dress. Her gown was simple but beautiful, made from cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. She'd sewn every stitch herself over the past weeks, pouring all her hopes and dreams into the fabric. "You look like an angel," Maria said, tears in her eyes. Sarah looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The frightened, struggling widow was gone. In her place was someone stronger, more confident, ready to face the future. She touched the silver locket at her throat, her mother's, the one Moss had tried to take, and thought about how far she'd come. "Thank you," she said to Maria, "for everything, for being family when I had none." "You have plenty of family now," Maria replied, "and about to gain even more." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect, with the kind of sky that seemed made for new beginnings. Jacob woke early, dressed carefully, and spent time alone with his father's Bible, the one item of his father's besides the belt that he still possessed. He read familiar passages about love and commitment, about building your house on solid foundations, about the importance of standing firm when storms came. Then he fastened his father's belt around his waist, feeling the familiar weight of it, the crosses pressed against his side. His father would have liked Sarah, Jacob thought, would have approved of her strength, her kindness, her willingness to choose hope despite having every reason to choose bitterness. "Wish you were here," Jacob said quietly to the empty room. But I think you'd be proud of the man I've tried to become." At the main house, Maria and the town women were helping Sarah dress. Her gown was simple but beautiful, made from cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. She'd sewn every stitch herself over the past weeks, pouring all her hopes and dreams into the fabric. "You look like an angel," Maria said, and tears in her eyes. Sarah looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The frightened, struggling widow was gone. In her place was someone stronger, more confident, ready to face the future. She touched the silver locket at her throat, her mother's, the one Moss had tried to take, and thought about how far she'd come. "Thank you," she said to Maria, "for everything, for being family when I had none." "You have plenty of family now," Maria replied, "and about to gain even more." The guests began arriving around noon. The entire town of Redemption Creek seemed to have made the journey, along with neighboring ranchers, the territorial marshal, and even Sheriff Porter, looking sheepish but genuine in his well-wishes. Dutch and the ranch hands had outdone themselves with decorations, wildflowers everywhere, the willow arch draped in white fabric, benches arranged in neat rows facing where Doc Hartley would stand. A traveling photographer had been hired, a rarity in these parts. He set up his equipment carefully, explaining that this would be the first wedding photograph ever taken in this region. The massive camera on its tripod looked imposing, but Sarah was grateful. She wanted to remember this day in every detail. Jacob stood at the front with Doc Hartley, Dutch beside him as best man. His hands were steady, his heart full. He watched the guests arrive and take their seats, saw the ranch hands cleaned up and dressed in their finest, saw the townspeople who'd ridden to help during the battle smiling and nodding at him. Then Marcus appeared at the top of the main house steps with Sarah on his arm, and everything else faded away. She was breathtaking. The afternoon sun caught the silk of her dress, made her dark hair shine, illuminated her face with a joy that took Jacob's breath away. She was smiling, her eyes locked on his, and in that moment, Jacob understood what his father had meant about Grace. This woman choosing to love him was a gift he'd never deserved, but would spend his life trying to be worthy. Over as they walked down the makeshift aisle, Sarah took in everything. The flowers that Maria had arranged, the faces of people she'd known in her struggling days, now witnessing her happiness, the ranch hands who'd fought to protect her, and most of all, Jacob, standing tall and steady, watching her approach with an expression of such love and wonder that it made her want to run the rest of the distance into his arms. Marcus brought her to stand beside Jacob, then stepped back. But before he did, he leaned close and whispered, "Rebecca would be so happy." Sarah squeezed his hand in acknowledgement, then turned to face Jacob. Doc Hartley cleared his throat and began, "We are gathered here today in the sight of God and this community to witness the marriage of Jacob Stone and Sarah Coleman. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, joyfully, and in the full knowledge that it requires commitment, sacrifice, and grace." He looked at them both with the wisdom of a man who'd seen much of life. "I've known you both through your darkest moments. I've stitched Jacob's wounds more times than I care to count, and I've watched Sarah rebuild her life from ashes. You've both known loss, known pain, known what it means to stand alone. Today you choose to stand together." Jacob and Sarah had written their own vows. Jacob went first, his voice steady and clear. "Sarah, I promise to stand with you through whatever life brings, to support your dreams and share your burdens, to see you not as someone to protect but as a partner to walk beside. I promise to love you in the easy moments and the hard ones, in sickness and in health, in prosperity and in struggle. I promise to honor the memory of those who brought us together and to build a life worthy of their sacrifice. All my days, Sarah, that's my promise. All my days." Sarah's turn came, and she spoke through tears of joy. "Jacob, you've already kept most of these promises without even speaking them. You've shown me what real courage looks like, what real goodness means. I promise to be worthy of that example. I promise to stand beside you, to share in your work and your dreams. I promise to build with you, to face fear with you, to choose hope even when it's difficult. I promise to honor your father's memory and the lessons he taught you, and to help you live up to the man you've already proven yourself to be. All my days, Jacob, every single one, Doc Hartley smiled. The rings? Dutch stepped forward with the bands, Rebecca's grandparents' rings, polished and ready. Jacob took the smaller one and placed it on Sarah's finger, his hands gentle but sure. Sarah did the same for Jacob, both of them remembering the day weeks ago when they'd first put these rings on, when the future had seemed uncertain but full of promise. By the authority vested in me, by the territory, Doc Hartley announced, his voice ringing out clear and strong, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jacob, you may kiss your bride. Jacob cupped Sarah's face in his hands, gently, reverently, and kissed her as the assembled guests erupted in cheers and applause. When they finally broke apart, both were crying and laughing at once. The photographer captured the moment. The entire community gathered around the newly married couple. The ranch in the background, everyone smiling. Years later, that photograph would hang in the main house, a reminder of the day when two people who'd been through fire chose to build something beautiful from the ashes. The celebration that followed was joyous and loud. Tables had been set up laden with food, roasted beef, fresh bread, vegetables from Maria's garden, pies and cakes contributed by every woman in the territory, it seemed. There was music too, a fiddle player from town and a harmonica player from the ranch hands, playing dancing tunes that got even the oldest guests up and moving. Jacob and Sarah had their first dance as husband and wife in the ranch yard as the sun began its descent. They moved slowly, carefully, Jacob still mindful of his healing wounds, but unwilling to miss this moment. Sarah rested her head against his chest, and they swayed together while their community watched with approval and affection. Happy? Jacob murmured into her hair. More than I ever thought I could be, Sarah replied. You? So happy it scares me, Jacob admitted. Keeps waiting for something to go wrong. Nothing's going wrong, Sarah said firmly. We're done with going wrong. From here on, we build something right. Marcus danced with Sarah next, emotional and proud. Welcome to the family, daughter, he said. That's what you are now, you know. The daughter Rebecca never got to be to me in life, but sent to me anyway. I'll try to honor that, Sarah said. Both of you. Dutch claimed a dance, too, gruff but kind. You're good for him, Mrs. Stone. Make sure he doesn't do anything stupid like fighting battles when he should be healing. I'll do my best, Sarah promised. Laughing, as evening fell and lanterns were lit around the ranch yard, the celebration continued. Toasts were made, some eloquent, some rambling, all sincere. Stories were told about Jacob's heroism and Sarah's resilience. Children ran between the tables, their laughter ringing out in the twilight. It was, everyone agreed, the finest wedding anyone could remember. Finally, as stars emerged overhead and guests began making their way home or to accommodations in town, Jacob and Sarah slipped away to the cabin that had been prepared for them. Not the small cabin Jacob had been living in, but a larger one on the property that Marcus had quietly built as a wedding gift. It had a real bedroom, a sitting room, even a small study where Sarah could handle mine business. It was a home, their first real home together. Inside, they found more gifts from Marcus, furniture, linens, kitchen supplies, everything needed to start their life. And on the table, a framed photograph of Rebecca with a note in Marcus's handwriting, for the family she helped create. With love and gratitude, Sarah picked up the photograph, studying the face of the woman she'd never met but owed so much to. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Jacob came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. She'd be happy seeing what we're building. I hope so, Sarah said. I want to make her proud. You already have, Jacob assured her. By being brave enough to accept what she offered, by turning tragedy into opportunity, by choosing to build instead of giving up. She'd be proud of both of us. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other, looking at Rebecca's photograph, feeling the weight of gratitude and responsibility and hope. Then Sarah turned in Jacob's arms and kissed him. and they began their first night as husband and wife, surrounded by love, protected by community, and blessed beyond measure. 3 months later, as autumn painted the hills in gold and red, Sarah had news. She told Jacob over breakfast in their cabin, her hands trembling with excitement and fear. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. Jacob's face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, terror, wonder, before settling on something like awe. "Are you sure?" "Doc Hartley confirmed it yesterday," Sarah said. "We're going to have a baby, Jacob, sometime next spring." Jacob stood, came around the table and knelt beside her chair. He placed his hand gently on her still, flat stomach, his eyes bright with tears. "A baby," he repeated. "A baby. Are you happy?" Sarah asked, suddenly nervous. They'd never discussed children, had been so focused on building their life together that the future beyond that had remained unspoken. "I'm terrified," Jacob admitted, "and thrilled, and completely overwhelmed, and happier than I've ever been in my life." He looked up at her. "How do you feel?" "Exactly the same," Sarah said, laughing and crying at once, "but mostly grateful. This baby, they're proof that good things can come from darkness, that life goes on, that we built something real." They told Marcus that evening over dinner. His reaction was immediate and emotional. This would be his grandchild, the continuation of everything Rebecca had set in motion. Maria cried and immediately began planning, talking about cribs and baby clothes and all the preparations needed. Over the following months, as Sarah's pregnancy progressed, life at the ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. The Rebecca-Tom mine continued to produce beyond expectations, employing 30 men from Redemption Creek and the surrounding areas. The profits were split as Sarah had promised. Fair wages, investment in safety and equipment, support for the community, and savings for the future. Jacob and Marcus's partnership flourished as well. The ranch expanded, acquired more land, improved their breeding stock. Jacob proved to have a natural talent for ranching, his combination of hard work and careful observation making him invaluable. The Whitfield Stone brand became known throughout the territory for quality cattle and honest dealings. On a cold December morning, Jacob took Sarah to visit his father's grave on the outskirts of Redemption Creek. They hadn't been back since the wedding, and Jacob felt it was time to share their news. The grave was simple, just a wooden marker that Jacob had carved himself years ago. Sarah placed wildflowers on it, the same kind she'd placed in Jacob's Bible that first day at the ranch, and stepped back to let Jacob have a moment alone. "Pa," Jacob said quietly, his breath misting in the cold air, "I wanted you to know I found what you always said I should look for. Someone worth standing for, someone to build something with. Her name's Sarah, and she's everything." He paused, emotion choking his voice. "And we're having a baby. Your grandchild. I wish you could meet them, wish you could see what we're building here. But I'm trying to live by what you taught me, trying to be the kind of man you'd be proud of." Sarah came up beside him, took his hand. "We thought if it's a boy, we'd name him Thomas, after my first husband. And if it's a girl, Rebecca," Jacob finished, "after Marcus's daughter. Both of them, they're part of what brought us here. But we'd give them your father's name as a middle name," Sarah added. "Thomas Elijah or Rebecca Eliza after your father Elijah. So they'd carry his legacy forward." Jacob looked at her, love overwhelming him. "He'd like that. He'd like you." As they walked back through town, people waved and called greetings. Jacob Stone was no longer the lonely drifter who kept to himself. He was a partner in the biggest ranch in the territory, husband to one of the wealthiest women in 3 counties, and a man respected for his character as much as his courage. But none of that mattered as much as what came next. Being a father, raising a child with Sarah, building a family from the ruins of their separate losses. Spring came early that year, bringing warm breezes and new life. On an April morning filled with bird song and sunshine, Sarah went into labor. Doc Hartley was there, as was Maria, and Jacob paced outside the bedroom for 8 hours, convinced he was going to lose his mind from worry and helplessness. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. Maria appeared in the doorway, beaming. You have a daughter, Mr. Stone, a beautiful, healthy daughter. And Sarah's fine. Tired, but fine. Jacob entered the bedroom to find Sarah propped up against pillows, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked exhausted and radiant all at once, and when she looked up at him, her smile made his heart stop. "Come meet our daughter," she said softly. Jacob approached carefully, as if afraid he might break something. Sarah placed the baby in his arms, and he looked down at the tiny face, the closed eyes, the impossibly small fingers. She was perfect, complete, miraculous. "Hello, Rebecca," he whispered. "Rebecca Eliza Stone. I'm your father, and I promise I'm going to do my best by you." The baby yawned, opened her eyes briefly, and seemed to look right at him before closing them again. In that moment, Jacob understood what his father had meant about legacy, about building something that lasted beyond your own life. This child, this perfect little person, was the future. She was proof that standing for what was right had consequences that rippled forward in ways you couldn't always see. Marcus came to visit later that day, bringing gifts and tears. He held his granddaughter with the careful reverence of a man who'd lost one daughter and found another, who'd watched loss transform into hope. "She looks like her mother," he said. "But she's got your strength in her grip, Jacob. She's going to be formidable." "She'll have to be," Sarah said from the bed. "She's got a lot to live up to. 2 Rebeccas, a Thomas, and Elijah. That's a heavy legacy." "She'll handle it," Jacob said confidently, "because she'll have us to help her carry it." And so the seasons turned, and the years began to pass. The mine continued to prosper, the ranch continued to grow, and the Stone family became part of the fabric of the community. They had 2 more children over the next 5 years, a son they named Thomas Elijah, fulfilling their promise, and another daughter they named Maria Grace, after the woman who'd become family to them both. On a summer evening, when Rebecca was 5, Thomas was 3, and Maria was just learning to walk, the whole family gathered on the porch of their home. The larger house that Marcus had built for them stood solid and welcoming, surrounded by gardens that Sarah tended and corrals where Jacob trained horses with their children watching. Marcus was there too, older now but still sharp, playing with his grandchildren with the joy of a man who'd found purpose again after grief. Dutch stopped by after finishing the day's work, bringing candy for the children that Maria scolded him for, but never actually stopped. As the sun set and painted the sky in brilliant colors, Rebecca, the oldest, already showing signs of her mother's intelligence and her father's steadiness, climbed into Jacob's lap. "Papa, tell us the story," she demanded. "Which story?" Jacob asked, though he knew. "About how you met Mama, about the 8 knife wounds and the rich rancher and the mine and the battle. Tell us that story." Jacob looked at Sarah, who smiled and nodded. It was a story they'd told many times and would tell many more. A story about courage and sacrifice, about grace and second chances, about building something beautiful from shared hardship. "All right," Jacob said, settling Rebecca more comfortably. "It starts in a town called Redemption Creek, and it's about a man who made a choice to stand for someone who needed standing for. He didn't know it would change his whole life. He didn't know it would lead him here to this porch, with these people, with this family. He just knew it was the right thing to do." As Jacob told the story, his children listened with rapt attention. Sarah listened with love and remembrance, and Marcus listened with gratitude for the family his daughter's kindness had created. The stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had watched Jacob nearly die in an alley, that had witnessed his miraculous survival, that had blessed his wedding day. Some men talk about doing the right thing, Jacob thought. Others bleed for it. But the real gift isn't in the bleeding, it's in what you build after you survive, in the love you find, in the family you make, in the legacy you leave. He looked at his daughter's face, listening so intently to a story she'd heard a dozen times. He felt his wife's hand on his shoulder, his son leaning against his leg, his youngest daughter asleep in Sarah's arms. He saw Marcus, the father-in-law who'd become the father he'd lost, and he felt the weight of his own father's belt still around his waist after all these years. This, Jacob thought, This is what it was all for. Every wound, every moment of pain, every sacrifice and struggle, it all led here. To this perfect evening, this beautiful family, this life built on the foundation of choosing to stand when it would have been easier to walk away. The story ended as it always did, with Jacob and Sarah's wedding, with the promise of the future. But the real story, the one being written every day on this ranch, in this family, in this community, that story was just beginning. And it would continue, Jacob knew, long after he was gone. Through his children, through the lessons he taught them, through the example he lived every day. That was legacy. That was purpose. That was everything that mattered. Again, Rebecca demanded when the story ended. "Tell it again." But Sarah stood, gathering up their youngest. "Tomorrow," she promised. "Right now it's bedtime. Say goodnight to Papa and Grandpa Marcus." As the children were tucked in and the household settled for the night, Jacob and Sarah stood together on their porch one last time, looking out over the ranch that had become their home, the life they'd built together. "Do you ever think about that night in the alley?" Sarah asked quietly. "Wonder what would have happened if you'd walked away?" "Never," Jacob said firmly. "Because I couldn't have walked away. My father taught me that some things matter more than safety, more than self-preservation. Standing for people who need it, that's one of those things. I'm glad he taught you that," Sarah said. "Even though it nearly cost you your life, even though it brought you so much pain. I'm glad you stood for me. I'd do it again," Jacob said. "Every wound, every moment. Because look what it gave me." He gestured to their home, their sleeping children, their life. "This is worth any price." Sarah kissed him gently. "Come to bed, husband. Tomorrow brings more work, more children demanding stories, more life to live." "Best offer I've had all day," Jacob said. Following her inside, the door closed behind them, the lamps were extinguished one by one, and the ranch settled into peaceful darkness under the stars. Somewhere in the night an owl called. Somewhere in the corrals, horses shifted and nickered softly. Somewhere in the hills, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow. And in a small cemetery outside Redemption Creek, a simple wooden cross marked the grave of Elijah Stone, circuit preacher, who taught his son that real goodness showed itself in sacrifice, and that the measure of a man wasn't in what he took from the world, but in what he gave to it. His son had learned those lessons well, and now he was teaching them to the next generation, ensuring that the legacy of standing for others, of choosing courage over comfort, of building something good from hardship would continue into a future that seemed, in that moment, as bright and boundless as the star-filled sky.